Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for the third in the series, this remarkable series on covering Israel. I'm Ed Wasserman. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism here. And I'm very happy to have the quality of food that we've had, and also give me a chance to wear my suit. I want a special thanks to Ken Bamberger, Faculty Director of the Berkeley Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies, and Joan Beater, who I'll introduce more fully in a moment, who's Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism here. We're inviting our guest of honor today, Janine Zacharia, to present a third talk, a reporter's notebook. Janine was Jerusalem Bureau Chief and Middle East Correspondent for the Washington Post from December 2009 through April 2011. During her time at the Post, she reported widely throughout the Middle East, beyond Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, including assignments in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey. Janine reported on the uprisings in Egypt and Bahrain as they began in early 2011. Before then, from 2005 to 2009, Janine worked as chief diplomatic correspondent for Bloomberg News based in D.C. During that period, she traveled to more than 40 countries with then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and other senior administration and military officials. Her earlier career included 5 years as Washington Bureau Chief for the Jerusalem Post and 5 years in Jerusalem, working for various news outlets, including Reuters. She was a regular contributor to the New Republic and has appeared routinely as a cable news analyst on MSNBC, CNN, and other networks. She was also a regular panelist on Gwen Eifel's Friday Evening Roundtable, Washington Week in Review. During the 2008-2009 academic year, Janine was awarded a Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford University, where she is currently teaching. She earned her Bachelor of Art degrees in Literary Studies from Middlebury College and is originally from Long Island. Janine will be in conversation with our own Joan Beater, Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism. Joan is Senior Lecturer, formerly news and documentary producer at ABC Network News in New York for 10 years. She also taught at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University for a decade. Joan came to Berkeley in 1990 to teach core courses in reporting and producing television news and long-form video. While spending 10 summers as a consultant to television news companies in Singapore, Joan began researching and writing a book that became The Jews of Singapore, a history of Singapore's Iraqi Jewish community, published in 2007. After a trip to Israel and the West Bank in 2010, Joan created and taught a cross-platform travel course called Reporting on Israel and Palestine, which inspired the current series. It's a great pleasure. I turn you over to Joan Beater and our guest of honor, Janine Zacharia.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks again for providing the venue for this series. It's a nice, comfortable room, and I'm glad we can accommodate the some close to 100 people that are replied to come to hear Janine. And I also wanted to thank Julie from our staff, Julie Arano from our staff, and Rebecca and her Gobert and her staff from the Institute, who have really put this together, and the Institute's provided the food. So thank you, Julie, in the back there, and thanks to Rebecca and Andre for the help in putting it together. So, welcome, Janine.
Thank you.
We'd never met before, and I'm really glad to have a new friend. She's really an amazing person, an amazing journalist, and what a week to have her here at the J School. It couldn't have been timed better. We just lucked out. So we're going to start with that, the review of the week when Netanyahu was in the States for 5 full days, meeting with Obama, speaking to AIPAC, both of that in Washington, D.C., then whipping out here to talk to our own Jerry Brown to sign an agreement. And I know I was witness to Janine's tweeting about that because she covered that story. And then the meeting at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, and then on top of it, the stopping of the ship with arms headed to Gaza, presumably by Stapwire, arms provided by Iran. So, where to begin? I think we should at least start with what your take was on covering, because she did cover Bibi for part of the week, on seeing Bibi and the impact of his visit this last week.
Well, thanks, Joan, and thanks for the question. It's a real pleasure to be here. I don't know, I had to sign a conflict of interest form, and I said, well, I teach at Stanford. Is that I don't know if I should disclose that. But anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. This is my first time at the Berkeley Journalism School. I love that this is sponsored by the Journalism School and the Israel Studies, because these are my two bailiwicks, so it's actually perfect for me. I think it's interesting to look at the Bibi visit in its entire context, but sure, we can start with his trip to Silicon Valley, and I think it makes sense to, because one of the things I tweeted, and I have a piece that I wrote for the Chronicle for Sunday about this, is that in many ways his visit to California, and specifically to Silicon Valley, was more important for Bibi than his trip to Washington was. And I'll explain why, and we can have a discussion about this, I hope, in the Q&A. For Netanyahu right now, especially given what's going on in terms of boycotts and divestment and sanctions on the one hand, which has some roots here in Northern California, I know, and given what's going on with the American-led negotiations on the peace process and his discomfort with the President Obama, which I imagine you probably saw a little bit of that, and we'll talk about it. By coming here, it gives him a chance to really burnish Israel, not only burnish Israel's image, but also brand Israel the way he wants to, namely as a technological innovator, superpower, selling GPS startups for $1 billion and 3D sensor technologies. He can brag about that, be literally the press release from the consulate didn't say Prime Minister Netanyahu, it said, the Prime Minister of the Startup Nation will be visiting the Computer History Museum on Wednesday, March 5th, right? So for him, it really, it's not only for business opportunities that he came. Certainly he does want Jerry Brown to hire a team of Israelis to fix California's water problem. I'm not saying he doesn't, but he definitely it's much more in his comfort zone. And Washington, it's the image where the world gets to brand Israel as, perceived intransigence in the peace process, tensions with Obama over the Palestinian issue and Iran. So I think that's why this was an important step for the Prime Minister to come here. Behind the scenes, the Foreign Ministry was on strike this week. So you had I don't know if you probably read that, those of you that follow the Israeli press. So literally, I called Consul General Andy David, who some of you have probably seen, and he couldn't talk to me. And this was I knew that this was his big moment. The Prime Minister of Israel's coming here. He doesn't come here, Yeah, right. He organized this deal with Jerry Brown. He could not be present for it. I mean, this is like true Israel, the third world part of Israel, right? The Prime Minister literally landing and no one can greet him. So I think he had it was a symbolic signing of an agreement with Jerry Brown, but from talking to officials both in the governor's office and in the Prime Minister's delegation, I think I would expect to see some actual follow-up, especially on the water issue, and that's what I focused on in my piece for Sunday.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
On the other hand, every place he went, he was blaming Iran for all the problems. So Iran came, more important than the peace process, which he said won't go forward because unless Palestinians recognize the Jewish state. But every place he went was anti-Iran or bashing Iran, and what impact do you think that will have on the process?
Well, I think let's just take a step back and talk about sort of Netanyahu and Iran, and in the sense that for him, and many of you in this audience know this, is that for him, Iran, that's the issue he wants to be talking about. That's the existential threat that he feels. Israelis today, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about, from a journalism perspective, my trajectory covering these issues, Israelis today are very post-Palestinian, and the Palestinian issue is not, apart from the stalwarts on the left or some other thinkers on the issue, is not in the primary focus of Israelis. In the last election, as many of you know, probably the inflation in the price of cottage cheese was a bigger issue, and I'm not joking, than the Palestinian issue. It got talked about more by far. In fact, the Palestinian issue barely got mentioned it's the first election really in, I would say, in Israel's history where there was not talk of the Palestinian issue, peace process, state, what's going on with that. So it's really not something that his political constituents are focused on or want to be talking about. And I'm not even talking about the right-wingers in his coalition. It's like really the country. So there's no pressure on Netanyahu to really engage on this issue domestically. And anybody who knows Netanyahu knows that he primarily is political. I mean, that is it. All politics is local. It's especially true in Israel. So that's why when he comes to America and he greets Secretary Kerry and President Obama, who are in fact focused on the Palestinian issue because they believe the window, I don't know how many times the window's closed, but the window's closing again on the chance for a two-state solution, he's out of his comfort zone, and not really. I mean, he handles it pretty well, right? I mean, I don't know if how many people saw the Oval Office optics of the president and prime minister, sitting there and. All right, so let's just back up for a second. First of all, Ukraine. We're all been focused on Ukraine. The Ukraine works for, I don't know who, like one person, Bibi Netanyahu, because by having a crisis in Ukraine, there was less focus. Even he could start his remarks in the Oval Office saying, I know the president's very busy with Ukraine, so he won't have time to put too much pressure on me about the Palestinian issue. That's basically what he was saying, right? So he was, I don't want to be too cynical about it, but I'll be a little cynical. I think probably thrilled that there was another crisis, and this has happened a lot in Israeli visits. He comes every March for the AIPAC summit. So, but basically the way this worked was you have Secretary Kerry running around messianically, like Israeli top officials have called him. This crazy, what's with this Secretary Kerry? The Israelis are like, why does he have this messianic compulsion about doing a deal, right? And they're all sitting there entertaining him, but also mocking him. And we can talk a little bit about that. And then a minute before Netanyahu arrives in Washington, the president gives a lengthy interview to Jeff Goldberg, okay, who's some of you might know.
On Bloomberg, actually.
Well, yeah, so he's writing a column for Bloomberg now, one of my former employers, where he's pretty tough on Israel on a variety of the peace issues. This, of course, is an outrage for Netanyahu. Why would the president do this? And Joan pointed out a piece in the New York Times saying they've got this good cop, bad cop routine with Bibi going on. Kerry making nice, it's okay, and Obama saying, no, it's time to do a deal. It's time. Israel's getting more isolated, it's time. So Netanyahu walks into the Oval Office, and they have this meet. This is before, they had deliberately they did the photo op before the meeting this time because they've had some disasters where they've done it after. Seriously. And Netanyahu was really gave a talking to the President of the United States about 67 borders. It didn't work well. So they figure they can get out easy with the photo op ahead of time. And they don't know Netanyahu, really. They really need me over there to explain this. They don't know. They don't know how he's going to eat the president for breakfast. Obama gives his little nice talk. And then the Bibi Netanyahu, what's his message? The people of Israel, and I'm paraphrasing here, sent me here to stand strong against all pressure. Like looks over at Obama. That's basically what he said. Basically, that's his way of saying, I'm not interested in your peace deal right now, okay? I'm worried about Iran. And not only am I worried about Iran, I'm worried about the way you, Mr. President, are handling Iran naively. And that was the theme throughout the whole week.
Right.
Both in the meetings in the White House, in his speech to AIPAC, it was all Iran.
Right, and he's actually resentful of the way the president handled Iran in this detente sort of that they're having without including Netanyahu in the process. So he's also, in addition to being anti-Iran, he's a little annoyed.
Annoyed, yeah. Certainly it's there's definitely, let's say, if we want to be diplomatic, a difference of opinion about this. And when the president announced that they had this interim deal a few months ago with the Iranians, he had barely left the stage before, in Jerusalem, Netanyahu was issuing a statement saying, what did he call it? A historic mistake, right? He called it a historic mistake. Now, this is not the way two top allies are supposed to be working this, right? If you have a problem or you're concerned, you usually handle it quietly. But the relationship has gotten so bad that, and I'm not saying bad in terms of, of course, the relationship, the alliance, what's the word they always use? Unshakable, unbreakable, whatever they call it. It's still very strong. But I think it's a problem, and now I'm talking as an analyst now, for when the U.S. and Israel are fighting in public like this. I don't think it's good for advancing the peace process, for dealing with the Iranian issue, or for bilateral ties in general. So,
Right, that's exactly true. So I was going to ask you about the relationship between Obama and Netanyahu. So you don't feel that Obama's able to put real pressure, because a lot of the news articles were The president puts pressure on him, especially after that talk, and yet this doesn't seem to bother Netanyahu at all. His steadfast sort of keep the status quo underline seems to be winning out. I mean, 2 weeks ago there was much more enthusiasm for the peace process than there is now after after Netanyahu's week here. So is the Kerry thing dead then? Is it?
No, the Kerry thing's not dead. And while he was here this week, I was able to talk to some Israeli officials to try and get a feel for where things are at. I think Kerry will produce some kind of a framework deal. But what I told this official was, well, which one should I go back to in my archives? Like, which one are you? Because, I covered the Bush roadmap and, the Clinton peace parameters. What they're going to do is, so beware what's going to happen if next month they get this framework deal, which I'm not sure they will. It's going to be very watered down. It's going to be a statement of principles, and they won't necessarily have agreed to it, okay? But they will have a framework deal. It's just not necessarily some deal that everybody agreed to. But they want to be able to put some marker down. Problem is, has everybody seen that there's been a lot of reporting about Hillary Clinton already? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But and Clinton, okay, President Clinton, Bill Clinton, did a lot of his negotiating late, right, in his second term on this issue. But he was down in the weeds with them on this. He was flying to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. He was doing all these kinds of things. He was really focused on it.
He almost got there. Right?
He almost got there, and you also had Yasser Arafat was, and Barack was a different kind of leader than Bibi is. And so there was just a different zeitgeist at that time. I don't see that kind of presence from the president right now. And also, frankly, the Israelis and Palestinians were President Clinton developed a relationship with them that President Obama hasn't, even though President Obama went exactly a year ago to Israel for that deliberate purpose, to try and say to Israelis, I'm not your enemy. He went on all the tour, he did all the things he was supposed to do.
So you would agree, like last week, Olive Ben said, or 2 weeks ago, that he felt that Obama just doesn't have, he said the word knack. I think he meant a feel for Israel in sort of a similar way that what you're explaining how Clinton was really there, and Obama just hasn't been able to, even when he went to the site of the camps, that there.
Which camps? When he went?
He went to one of the Nazi.
When he was in Europe?
Yeah,
right.
When he was in Europe, and the comments were, "You have Israel now," as a result, without the long understanding of the long history of that. And I wondered if you think that is. I'm pretty sure that's felt throughout Israel, because I think there isn't a feeling of support. They don't feel that Obama is really supporting them.
So there's a couple of things there, Joan. I mean, first of all, as I mentioned at the start, this idea, you can't blame Obama's style for this, totally. I mean, there's a certain amount of this. I mean, you have to be a little bit of a smoother operator, almost a therapist, to get this deal done, to really understand, I'm serious, to understand the Israeli and Palestinian psyches on this is much more important, because it's not enough to be like, wait a minute, I don't understand. They already have the land thing worked out. We know what's going to happen in Jerusalem. Lamala, Lamata, we're going to above and, the part above will belong. There's all these things they've negotiated already. But to understand the psyche is important. And I think that Alouf's right in that respect. But it's more than that. It's this idea that I said in the beginning, that Israelis in general are post-Palestinian, and they do not see it as a national imperative. There is nobody on the streets of Israel outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's office saying, do a deal with the Palestinians, end the occupation, right? It's about, I can't afford my apartment in Tel Aviv, cottage cheese is too expensive, I'm striking at the foreign ministry across the street because my wages are too low. The country's just in a different place right now. And even on the Iran issue that Netanyahu brings to AIPAC and the Simon Wiesenthal Museum in LA and on his trip here, even when he's signing an accord with Jerry Brown in Silicon Valley, this interception of this weapons, he took time to talk about Iran. It's that there's nothing going on in Israel that's going to drive it. So Secretary Kerry comes, he does his little thing, they accommodate him, and then they move on.
Away.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about the last issue before we move on to some other things, and that would be the IDF and the naval commanders boarding the ship, stopping the ship in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Iran is denying that they had put guns up, that they were responsible for the weapons, the rockets or the missiles that are on board. The ship is now on its way to Eilat. This is another supportive thing something that supports Netanyahu's argument that Iran is terrible, we shouldn't do anything with them. Do you think it's real? Do you, because...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I certainly think it's an arms shipment, which they routinely
Yeah.
intercept. I think the way that he dealt with it was certainly to get maximum impact while in America, right? I mean, the journalists who were traveling with him, he spent the night that this was happening, he was in LA, and they arrived in Silicon Valley, and they said to me, Janine, where are we? Like, we're up all night. I'm like, what were we up all night with? Oh, the shipment. In other words, they got maximum press benefit out of this particular shipment because of what I said earlier, that the Prime Minister just wants to tell the United States, you can't trust Iran, they're lying to you on everything. Now, the shipment was something else in terms of arming Hamas, and was it actually going to, we don't know for sure, but he definitely wanted to make that point clear while he was here, that this is another data point that you cannot let this country go nuclear. And I mean, his big thing is that his biggest problem, just to be clear for those of you who follow the Iran thing, is on this question of whether or not to allow Iran to continue to enrich any uranium. Israel wants a blanket, no enrichment. The United States says let them enrich a little to a certain level. And so that's just the main dispute on that.
Because Janine's so well versed in everything that has gone on in Israel, and I wanted to just, if you could take a little time and tell your story, like how did you get there? You've had an incredible career, capped off by 2 years during the Arab Spring, as it happens, in Jerusalem. So how did you get? And I think there are some journalism students here who would appreciate knowing, and it's a great story. So just tell us your story.
So the footnotes version is, I was a student at Middlebury College. How many people know Middlebury here? So, it's different.
Whoa.
And good Middlebury.
Wow.
So there I was in the
cool.
Green Mountains. I went and spent a semester in Israel on a Wesleyan program, another small liberal arts college in Jerusalem. And this was in January 1994, so three or 4 months after the signing of the Oslo Accords. A very different time in Israel than what we're seeing now. And I got very fired up about the place. And at that time, we were studying in the West Bank and all over the place. We were able to go back and forth. It was a very different time. So I knew I wanted to go back. And so in '95, and as I was explaining to Dean Wasserman, I applied to go to Columbia Journalism School, and I got accepted. But then I also applied for an internship at a magazine called the Jerusalem Report, bi-weekly magazine, working with Hirsch Goodman and David Horowitz and all these amazing Anglo journalists in Israel at the time. And they ended up, it was supposed to be 6 months, and I was going to travel, go back to Columbia, get my master's, and then they said after 3 months, have a job as a correspondent. So at that time, I had wonderful mentors, and I spent 3 years working at this magazine, reporting on Israel, learning Hebrew, meeting my good friend Rebecca Stein, who's here. And it was a great time in Israel, but that was a time of suicide bombings, and it was a tough time in Israel, and that was Bibi's first time as prime minister. So I've had the great fortune of covering him in the 90s and also now, and sort of watching that whole trajectory. And then, so I spent 4 or 5 years reporting in Jerusalem, and then I got hired to be the Washington correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. And so I moved to Washington, and I spent 5 years reporting now on Israel, but from a Washington perspective. So arms deals, peace process stuff, all that kind of thing.
But returning to Israel in the meantime.
But going back and forth and reporting on things that were happening in Israel at that time as well. So I was always going back and forth. But primarily I was covering Washington for them, and sort of became this sort of U.S.-Israel analyst in the process. And then it was time to get off the kibbutz, as I said, and enough already. I need to do something else. And I wasn't sure what. And then I met Al Hunt, who was used to be on... you guys know Al? Okay. He was on the CNN's Capital Gang.
CNN, right.
Remember him? White hair, and he was a Wall Street Journal columnist. And he went to Bloomberg and became a senior editor of the Washington Bureau. He saw me do a CNN appearance, and then he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "This is who I am." And then he said, "I'm going to call you." I said, "Look," he said, "Call me. If he calls me, I'm only taking one job." I go, "Well, who knows what Bloomberg is? This is like 2005, not before everybody knew what Bloomberg was, right?" And as a journalism outlet. And he said, "I want to make you the State Department correspondent." And I said, "Okay, that's the job I'll take." So then I was able to travel. I mean, still Israel, Palestinians, that was still my bread and butter. But, I got to travel to Africa and Pakistan, cover Secretary Rice, like Ed mentioned, and traveled as well with Secretary Clinton a little bit before finally getting a call for my dream job, which was to be Jerusalem bureau chief for Washington Post. They were looking for someone. So I ended up moving back to Israel and covering it now full-time and living in the same neighborhood in Jerusalem, but a very different Israel.
Later.
A very different Israel, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you perceive the differences between in the 90s and to 2009 when you went back.
You know, I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot and wondering whether it's exactly, you know, Israeli society that's been changing or it was me that changed. Because when I was there in the early mid-90s, you know, I was in love with Israeli soldier. I was, you know, I was learning Hebrew. I was, you know, I was loving learning about the conflict and eating hummus. I mean, I was caught up with the whole thing, right? And it was also a time, though, when there was a peace movement and the country looked like it was moving in a certain direction. And I couldn't have been happier, right? And so when I went back and I knew a lot more and I had a more nuanced, deeper understanding of the conflict, I was less tolerant of everybody always saying no. Everybody. The Israeli politicians, Palestinians, everybody, the no thing, you know? Lo, efshar. No, we can't do it, it's impossible. And whether it's, you know, selling me something in a store or, you know, giving up settlements or whatever, condemning violence, you know, whatever it is, right? So I was a little, I felt a little more impatient about everything. I still loved it there and I had the greatest job on the planet, but it felt different there. And I feel that Israeli society right now is in a time of serious transition, maybe right now. I don't know. Maybe people say, oh, it's always been ups and downs and everything. But I think right now what you're seeing in Israel is people are starting to pay attention a little more to the conversation about them abroad. And so, for example, this whole boycott thing wasn't really getting traction a few years ago. Or they saw it as like a limited Palestinian thing. But now, and then it was, oh, those crazy Berkeley people, you know, or whatever. And now, you know, when the Europeans started with the, you know, divesting and all that, it's starting to get their attention, and I think Israelis are a little confused by it. And this gets to my main observation about Israeli society right now, is that there's a real disconnect in the way that Israelis perceive themselves and the way the world perceives them. And Israelis see themselves still in the prism, and Netanyahu too, with all his Iran focus, of the Holocaust, of ha'olam kulo negdenu, the whole world is against us. And it's sort of one trajectory, right? It's like pogroms, Holocaust, no, forget it, Masada, you know, pogroms, Holocaust, Iran, you know? And so that's the way they see it. So they say, why? They put impression, and there's rockets. You see these rockets on the boat? Let me zoom in. The rockets are coming. And in other words, they see themselves that way, honestly. We're the ones getting pummeled with rockets.
So the idea of being surrounded by enemies.
We're surrounded by enemies, and the whole world will be against us no matter what we do. It's a 70s army song. You hear it a lot. It's a refrain right now, right? You hear the quoting of Hillel the Elder, right? If I'm not for me, who will be for me? This is not something that rabbis are saying in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, in the neighborhood there. They're saying it like in the shuk, on the street now. If I'm not for me, who's going to be for me? So that's on the one hand. And the disconnect comes with the rest of the world saying, wait a minute. You're like an economic powerhouse, right, technologically. You're the strongest military in the region, backed by the strongest military in the world. You're not in the pogroms. You're not in Eastern Europe, you know, at the turn of the century, you know? And I think that the failure of Obama and Kerry and others who think they can just mark it up on a framework piece of paper, the reason they're going to fail ultimately is because they don't understand that Israeli psyche. They don't know how to connect with it. They don't know how to say, I understand your concerns, Netanyahu. I understand you. He can say, I will never let Iran attack you. But then when they have the whole thing with Syria, for example, okay, it just makes Israel more insecure. When they say, for example, when Obama says, I have a red line. If you use poison gas against your own people, there will be, you know, suggesting there will be a military attack, and then there isn't. Israel's not, I mean, they worry about the people that are getting killed, but they're more worried about the signal that sends to Iran. The U.S. is not seriously going to come to our assistance. So this just feeds more into the insecurity that the Israelis feel. And that's my main point about where I'm seeing Israel right now, and that kind of mindset.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know how that ever changes because it takes a generation. It takes generations for that to change.
It doesn't only take a generation, it takes a leader, okay? It takes a leader to say, you can count on me, or we need peace with the Palestinians because, and here I'm going to articulate it for you, and here's what I'm going to do to make sure that we're going to be okay. And here's what the Jordan Valley really means. Instead of saying, oh my God, Kerry's borders on the Jordan Valley are Auschwitz borders, like a minister said, which is always about Auschwitz, which to me, as a Jew, I'm very resentful of this Holocaust, constant I think it's a defamation of the Holocaust, and someone disagreed with me because I get very upset about it, actually. The constant Auschwitz this and that, you know. Instead of saying, this is what it is. So, you know, Ariel Sharon, I don't know if you want to talk about him at all, but, you know.
Yes, I would like to, actually.
Ariel Sharon, who just died, finally, after 8 years in, not finally like, oh, he's dead finally, but, I mean, we wait 8 years. I mean, he was hooked up to life support. We never saw what he looked like over the last 8 years. This man of incredible girth and strength and, you know, it made me think when he died, like, of being in the White House covering him in like 2002, 3, when he used to come see George Bush. It was such a different atmosphere. And him just coming through and saying, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do.
So actually, I want to talk about Sharon a little bit more. But in that case, is there anybody in the pipeline?
No.
Is there a leader like that? There isn't that anybody has been able to find. Yeah.
It's a little like the U.S. Congress right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm serious. It's like, who's the strong voice of wisdom in the U.S. Congress right now? Who's the person who's like...
Harry Reid?
Who's that person who's like, here's the vision of the country, here's where we need to go? I mean, I don't know. The problem is everybody wants a Volvo. Do you want to understand Israel? Everybody wants a Volvo. Who knows what that means?
Materialism.
No. It's people, because you get to be a minister or a deputy minister, and then you get a Volvo, okay? So you get a driver and a Volvo. And that's why there's like 23 ministers and people who do not see eye to eye with Bibi. They want that goddamn Volvo.
Wow.
And so it creates a situation of paralysis. I mean, I don't know if Aluf or Ari Shavi would agree with me, you know, if they mention this, but that's the key to understanding Israel. They create these, you know, these national unity governments that paralyze the country and do not. That's why Sharon was strong. He said, "Screw this Volvo thing." He didn't say it like that, but you know, I'm going to create my own new party, you know, and lead the country.
Okay, wow. Well, let's just take a minute. Well, let's finish this while we're on Sharon. I didn't have a chance to talk to either Aluf or Ari about this, but I was, and maybe many of you felt the same way. When Sharon died, everybody wrote an obit. I mean, there were obits coming out of the wall, and I was totally confused. Was he a hero? Was he a villain? Everybody had a different point of view. And we don't know what he was because he didn't live long enough to tell us. So you covered him. You've covered a lot of prime ministers. What's your take on his legacy?
I mean, I don't want to get into a historical debate about Sabra and Shatila and the war crime court case against him. I mean, there's a whole, you know, in his earlier history, there were definitely some. I could see why he was considered a war criminal among the Palestinians.
Lebanon,
And I can see why the Israelis saw him, and also, I mean, before that, I mean, in the wars and the founding of the state in the 50s as well, then he had a difficult history, and I think that's why people were confused. Because on the flip side, the Israelis were like, he was one of our national heroes, right? So but what was interesting to me about it was the latter part of his life, and what he meant to me. I'm talking about since he split off from Likud and formed his Kadima party and said, and this is one of the fathers of the settlement movement, right? And he said, we can't do it anymore. I'm pulling these 8,000 Jewish settlers out of the Gaza Strip, whatever the political repercussions are, and there were, and I'm going to do it because it's in Israel's interest. And then I'm going to move on to the West Bank, and I'm going to start pulling Jewish settlers out of there too. Because the peace process had stalled, and he decided unilateralism was the way. Now, there was a lot of debate in Israel about whether you should pull out unilaterally and make Israel less safe, and a lot of people say he made a huge mistake now, and that's why you have rockets coming from the Gaza Strip. But what was impressive about it was that he made a decision, and he led the country, and he made a tough one, and he actually did something on the ground, which I don't see Netanyahu doing. And I think what's sad about it is one of the last, a big story I covered was after he finished with the Gaza evacuation in August 2005, September 2005, he moved on to the West Bank and he evacuated 2 settlements in the northern part of the West Bank, Homesh and another one. And I spent the night on a hillside there covering this evacuation. And then shortly after, before he was able to implement the next phase of that, he went into the coma. So I think of it as a little bit like the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
And her life, I don't know if those of you see it, she misses the train or she makes the train, and her life takes 2 different trajectories. And we only got to know one path. He goes into the coma, that whole thing's done, and it's over. And had he really lived, and continued, we may be in a different situation now. So, to me, that's the obit that needed to be written, because that's what it means for Israel today.
Did you see it written?
No, I should have written it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's only so many hours in the day. But here I'm sharing for whatever it's worth here.
Sitting on a hillside, I wanted to ask you about the access problems you had or didn't have when you were covering the West Bank or Gaza. As an American journalist, what are the problems of access in Israel?
Israel, you could argue, covering Israel, West Bank, Gaza is like the hardest story to cover or the easiest, depending. I can make the case for both. When I was leaving Israel after the first installment of my time there, I remember talking to a U.S. public affairs guy his name was Larry Schwartz, in the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, and I told him I was moving to Washington and just starting to get sourced in Washington. He said, Janine, when you get to Washington, you're not going to be able to pick up the phone and just call like a congressman on cell phone like you can here with these Knesset members, And I was like, oh, I'll figure it out, He was right to a certain extent. I mean, the access with Israelis, they love to talk. Right? They want to talk. They're dying to talk to you. Who doesn't ever met an Israeli who's like, oh, I don't want to talk. Never. So, in a way, that really works to your advantage as a journalist, right? They want to talk about the most controversial thing. They can't not leak things. It's just not in their DNA. So they want to have their opinions quoted. They want to leak to you. So in that way, it's easy. There certainly is. There have been problems with the government press office, which is what grants your credential as a foreign correspondent. A guy named Danny Seaman, who ran the office for a long time, and just Google him when you get home, and you'll see. So he openly mocked the foreign journalists. He was resentful of the coverage, particularly on the European networks like BBC, Sky News. And he tried to find ways to make it difficult for the foreign press to operate, either in terms of getting their driving permits, tax payments, things like that, rather than trying to say, here, let me give you some extra access, let me organize stuff for you. And then other organizations had sprung up over the years to realize, say, wait, we have to stop alienating the foreign press. Let's actually try and work with them. So in terms of Israel, it was very easy. And the same in the West Bank. You're so welcomed as a journalist to be able to operate and drive around and cover things and do interviews. With Gaza, after Hamas took over, it got a little trickier, but not bad. You basically go through the Erez checkpoint with your American passport. Israeli journalists can't go. And this is part of this post-Palestinian phenomenon I'm talking about, that there is so little, any story we have here is generally about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? There's sometimes a little something else, right? But it's generally about that. The Israeli press, you see very little about the Palestinians. It's a great irony, right? But it's also a tragedy, because it's the most important story for Israelis to understand what's happening inside, Ramallah and Bethlehem, and what are Palestinians really saying, and just deep reporting on this stuff. Because in the absence of it, what do you have? You allow the Israeli leadership to just frame the whole narrative.
Right.
So, for example, I'll tell you a story. I went to Gaza at one point, and you basically just walk across the border. After you get through Erez, you literally walk into Gaza, like a half-mile walk. And you have to go through 2 checkpoints on the other side. You go through the PA-controlled checkpoint, the Palestinian Authority-controlled one, and then you get to the Hamas one, which is like a little, they're very proud of themselves. They have this little trailer set up, and they give you a little stamp. And I was wearing that day, that particular reporting trip, like a little scarf around my neck. And this Hamas policeman, I don't know what to call him, he sort of indicates to me, put it on your head. Yeah. I'm sure you've had that with your travels. So anyway, so I went around Gaza, and I was okay. You operate with a fixer or a local Palestinian who can help you and know where to go in Gaza. and to help you set up meetings and stuff. And when I got back, I called a senior Hamas official.
What was the story?
Oh, the story was about how Palestinians feel about Hamas's leadership in the Gaza Strip, if they're turning it into this like little mini religious state, and how are they functioning, and what's going on. So I called up Mahmoud Zahar after, a Hamas leader, when I got back to Jerusalem, and I said, Mahmoud, I gotta tell you, people are really upset about what you guys are doing there, turning into like a mini Islamic state. And by the way, when I crossed in, they made me put the scarf on my head, and he said, Janine, how many people did that to you when you were in Gaza during your visit? And I said, well, truthfully, just that one guy. And he said, so how can you say that we're really turning it into Islamic State? You had one guy. Mm-hmm. To me, this was like a certain amount of sophistication in Hamas, okay, to like talk to me that way. In another instance, I was talking to a Hamas official. I think it was on that trip or a different trip. I went a lot. And we're talking about whatever we're talking about. The guy's dressed in a suit. This is not Hamas circa 1995, right? This is different Hamas, okay? This is suits. They got pictures of all the European diplomats up who've come. Americans don't go. They can't go under U.S. law. And he says to me, blah, 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 Janine, what do they think of us? And I said, who? He said, the Americans. I said, well, I said, the Americans that have heard of you, which is not very many, honestly, think of you probably blowing Israeli children to bits in a Sbarro pizzeria on King George Street. And he said, really? He said, that was like 10 years ago. And to me, it was an important moment for me reporting, of all the things I reported on, because I don't want to overstate it, and I don't want you guys to go away saying, oh, she's so naive, she bought all that Hamas BS and whatever. But it was for this guy to be distancing himself from the resistance or the reign of terror of the 90s that I lived through, to me was just more nuanced. And it made me think as a journalist that Israelis need to hear this stuff.
Americans
need to hear it. They need to know, like, these kinds of nuanced conversations are going on among Palestinians. So
that's interesting, because it leads to my next question, which was basically, what are Americans' biggest misconceptions about Palestine and Israel? This is one of them. What are some others?
It's very big. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many Americans are thinking about it that much anymore. Are people thinking about it?
Well, I think this group might be thinking about it.
This group's thinking about it. This is a knowledgable group. Broadly, I don't know how much they're thinking about it.
A lot of people do not see Hamas as a
Interlocutor?
sophisticated group. I mean, the Saudi Arabia just said, did they include Hamas in the speech today? They certainly called the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist group, and I don't know if Hamas
there's been this crackdown in the last few days with this Qatar thing. But
Egypt has considered them a terrorist group.
Yeah.
So I think
No, I mean, look, the U.S. lists them as terrorist group, and all these things. I'm just saying, when you go to Gaza and you meet these different people, you realize that Hamas is not the worst of the bunch if you're worried about Israeli security. There's a lot nastier elements there who really are more Al-Qaeda-like now. So this whole siege, closure, defensive, whatever you want to call it, I hate arguing about language, blockade, is creating a situation where you've got, it's fragmenting. And there's different levels, different groups. That's one thing that I think people don't understand. And I think, like I said, I think there's this misconception about, or just misunderstanding, like the people think maybe that people are talking in Israel about this issue in Israel when they're not. And in the West Bank, I think it's sort of, I don't know if anybody really understands anything that's really going on the ground anymore. I mean, it's so different when you go to Ramallah or you go to Hebron and you see the vibrancy of these places,
exactly true.
You see the vibrancy, but then you also see stupid things that just shouldn't be happening anymore. Like most of it being movement and access issues, like that Israel could solve in an instant. So from my perspective, I say, why do they not let them just fly out of here, or just why do they have this roadblock here? Why are they making problems at the Jordan border for this guy? And little things that could do so much to facilitate these negotiations, for example. Yeah.
Those were the two places I went when I went to Ramallah.
You were just there, yeah,
Yeah. But I must say, when I went to Ramallah, much to my surprise, it was actually more relaxed than Jerusalem in terms of feeling tension. Jerusalem, there was a lot of nervousness. You get to Ramallah and everybody's more comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they don't fear getting bombed, for one thing.
Can I add one more thing, Joan, too?
And Hebron, too. Mm-hmm.
The one thing, this whole question about occupation, I don't want to get into a debate with everybody about it, this idea that a lot, either at AIPAC or Americans in general or Israelis say we're not, even I was talking to an Israeli guy who came to Stanford the other day, and he said, Janine, we need to solve this problem with the Palestinians because it's in Israel's interest to do it. Okay, he's very worried about Israel's long-term image, isolation problems and stuff. And I said, well, what about ending the occupation? He's like, well, we don't have an occupation. So I said, well, I don't want to argue, but I'm saying the idea that an Israeli can say that,
Wow.
is very, very conventional in Israel. And then you hear it here too in the United States. There's a feeling like, well, they have sovereignty in certain areas. That's true, but then they can't leave those. There's kind of problems about that because it's not like they can just leave the area and go where they need to go. Same thing in Gaza. You hear, well, in America is like, well, we left Gaza, but then they can't go. They can't go where they need to go. So it's this misconception about it and the politicization of it is, I think, detrimental also for whatever John Kerry is thinking about.
Very hard to believe that he said that, actually. Very hard to believe.
Yeah.
One other thing I just wanted to ask if you noticed this is that I had an experience of meeting a J-school grad, actually, who was working in Ramallah, who happened to be able to get over, even though she has a PI, Palestinian passport, she was able to get through and come to meet me in Jerusalem. And the person who brought me to meet her was my cousin, who's second cousin twice removed, but anyway, a woman about the same age who was Israeli. And when the two of them met, and I very much like both of these two women, they could not connect. Absolutely could not connect.
What, the Ramallah Palestinian woman and your Jewish friend from Israel, cousin in Israel?
My cousin who's Israeli and the Palestinian.
Where they were just like this.
They were
about
just
each other?
like, oh, there was a wall. If the opposite of magnets coming. What do you call that? When magnets go the other way. Yes, whatever. Yeah.
Repel.
Thank you. That's what happened, and I saw it happening right in front of me, and I couldn't believe it.
Why couldn't you believe it though?
Well,
It's
I mean,
so
because it was so
surprising.
stark, and I realized that many Israelis don't know any Palestinians, or they never get to
Right.
talk to them. I mean, that was. I mean, I knew
It wasn't always this way.
but it wasn't until I
And
saw
yeah.
it that I really felt, oh my God, this is horrible, really horrible. Two wonderful women in my perception. So-
When Dennis Ross went down in flames as a peace negotiator after the
Right.
Camp David talks in 2000, he said we didn't do enough in track two. Okay, that was the big phrase in the diplomatic track two, meaning the people-to-people stuff. We didn't and God, they have gone the opposite direction on this.
Absolutely.
Even then, there were so many more. You had the Paris Center doing this, and the whatever Al-Quds University, and meeting to get. It's happening much less because you had the second Intifada, which came along, and then you built the wall, the fence,
Barrier.
security barrier.
That's where words are really
occupation, apartheid wall, whatever depending on your political point of view. But that wall and the inability for Israelis and Palestinians to interact casually, I think, has been detrimental for any chance for peace.
Exactly.
Detrimental.
Right. Or any way if they ever got close to peace of it actually working out smoothly. Even if they got
Forget
to
that.
the
That's a whole nother
world.
dimension.
So,
yeah.
and Israel has probably more reporters per square inch than any other country. It's just packed. Every place you go, you bump into a reporter. So I wanted to ask you what you're thinking about in terms of how you approach the experience as a reporter in Israel and the West Bank, or the whole experience. How do you approach that with an angle that's different from what everybody else has done? And I know you're writing a book.
Yeah.
Maybe this plays into a little bit. You can tell us about how you're approaching the book and that.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a challenge, right? It's a real challenge in any story. And, it's what I teach at Stanford. I teach a couple classes, the intro journalism class, and now I'm teaching a graduate level public affairs class. But anytime they do a story pitch for me, I immediately say to them, what do you think I say? I say, what is new here? What is new here? And that's particularly difficult when you're covering a story that, frankly, has gotten very cyclical. So there were times when I was there in that period with the Washington Post where half the time they were sending me out. I was going to Lebanon. That's where I went to all those places because there was just a richer story to tell in Lebanon or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Egypt. Like the Israel story was just not advancing in any way. You don't want to just tell incremental things about John Kerry. So it is a challenge. So you try to take yourself out of the daily headlines, which is very hard in a place like Israel where, I guess we have NPR updates, but that's kind of a
PR.
That's what we do here in Northern California. Are they listening to the NPR on the hour in the rest of the country? I don't know. Not as much,
Probably
right?
not. Probably not.
Whereas in Israel, like the hourly and half-hourly news, like it doesn't matter if you're in your car or not. If you're walking past someone else's car, you'll hear it. The broadsheet newspapers, although some of them are really struggling right now, from talking to my Israeli press friends who were here this week with Netanyahu, are still, people read newspapers physically. So the news is just so present in that place. So it is a challenge. And so you try and take a step back, and you say, okay, well, this, and this happened, and what does this really mean, and what can I say that's fresh here? So, for example, one story I did for the Washington Post was, you look for those A1 type angles, like the front page stories. Israel's military sort of losing its allure as the key institution that every young person aspires to be a part of, and that unites the country of Ethiopians and Russians and everybody. And there was some evidence that it was, and that it's a draft army, but that I actually met with the recruiters, and the people who have to actually sell it and market it. Because frankly, Israelis now, like here, no different than where I live in Redwood City, they're thinking about the next app. They're looking at Waze, which sold for $1 billion, and say, I can be the next Waze, or I can be Prime Sense, or I can be Google. I want Google to buy me, and they're all technologically savvy. The Israeli military just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this is a long time after I wrote that story, but it shows it has some legs, they were complaining that their top officers who are technologically savvy are leaving for the private sector. So it used to be like, if you were an Israeli officer, it's like, sababa, like everything's great. I'm an officer and I'm this. They're looking beyond that. So I think and this is happening at a time when Israel sees enormous change in the region that is making its situation a little bit, in a security sense, a little bit less steady, right? So that's the kind of story you look for.
And I do want to have a chance to talk about your book before we go to questions. So how are you approaching your long-term relationship with Israel, your long-term experience and with the Middle East and writing? How are you approaching that in the book?
It's very personal for me. I don't know, I'm talking very analytically, and I'm talking very, I'm trying a little bit like jarred, cynical journalist. But Israel's a very personal thing for me. I went when I was 19 years old. Now I'm 40. And it's a country that I care about. So I'm trying to write a story, a long story now, a book about this country to explain it to Americans and the world. Like why Israel can't get along. Why can't it be a normal country like its founders envisioned? Why is it still struggling like this? Why are they fighting with Obama? Why does Bibi come here and fight? Where does it come from? And sort of explain it, not necessarily as a therapist, but a little bit of these psychological things like what it means to be a friar, for those of you who, why Israelis don't let you enter the highway. It's the same reason that they won't identify which settlements they're really going to dismantle in a final peace deal. They don't want to be taken advantage of. And I want to explain that psyche, and I want to do it in a way that shows that I care about Israel, and also I think that I understand something about the place. And when I talk to Israelis about the idea, they say, that's interesting. Even when I talked to Ari Shavit about it, when he came to Stanford, I did what you're doing with him, and we sort of got into a discussion about this misunderstanding of Israel. I think going forward, this is a real challenge for them. And anybody who's watched Israel knows that they're always lamenting, why can't we do Hasbara? Why can't we get our message out? Oh, Hasbara, Hasbara. Because they think if we can just sell ourselves right, or market ourselves right, or explain ourselves right, that then everybody will love us.
People will see.
It's not only that, though. There's actual things they have to do politically on the ground. But to then say, wait a minute, but that Israeli official told me, even if we did a deal, the whole world will still be against us. Just show how deep-rooted that is. This is the kind of things I want to do with the book. But it's hard to do from here. And so for part of me, it's like my whole reporting career in life, even though I've done Sudan and Pakistan and Washington and all these other things, this is where I always seem to come back to. And out here in the Bay Area, it's sort of somehow, this is what I'm doing. I'm sitting here talking to you about Israel, or I'm, next week I'm doing something at the World Affairs Council on the Arab Spring. It's sort of, the Middle East is just kind of who I am. And so it turns out people, thank God, are interested in it out here. So I have a little bit of a business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a title for the book?
Well, the working title is The Disconnect, Why Israel and the World Can't Get Along. But the truth is, that was just for the proposal. And so once, hopefully, it sells, it's actually being shopped right now. So stay tuned next week. I'll let you know if it actually happens.
Okay, great. So we'll go to questions now. We've been talking about an hour. And Andre is going to walk around with the mic. So if I call on you, please stand up so it can be recorded.
It seems as if the business community is waking up to the issue of BDS. And
The Israeli
the Israeli business community is waking up to the potential threat of BDS. And the other thing is that you haven't mentioned in the entire time this idea of the state of Israel as being a Jewish state and the rejection of that by Abbas, and that as a roadblock to making any kind of agreement with the Palestinians.
And he
Yeah,
men- he
thank you for
mentioned
reminding me of that, yeah. The BDS thing, as I think I mentioned, is drawing more concern, especially in the business community. You're absolutely right. The Israeli Finance Ministry put out a study. Well, they didn't put it out. It leaked to Globes a couple weeks in late January, which I encourage you to look at, where it's less about the sort of BDS of, this Berkeley should divest from Caterpillar. Not that kind of level. It's more the Dutch banks and things like that really got their attention.
Copenhagen too.
This Dutch bank saying we're cutting off ties with Bank of Polen, Israel's top bank. That's the kind of stuff they were like, whoa. That was the kind of stuff where Bibi said, whoa, and had emergency meeting with Chancellor Merkel and things like that. So Europe is a huge trading partner for Israel. A lot of Israeli produce is grown in the Jordan Valley, and so it's it's definitely got them on their toes. It's not harming the Israeli economy now. But you have, for the first time, I'd say, major Israeli political figures like Tzipi Livni, a minister, saying, hey guys, this could really harm us in the longer term. So I don't think tomorrow suddenly the Israeli economy is tanking because of BDS, but it's certainly getting their attention. The Jewish state thing is relatively new. It's relatively new, and I think that Netanyahu has found that it's a powerful way for him to stall negotiations, because I don't really know what it means anymore. I don't even, I had this thing the other day, and I was talking to someone asked me this question about the Jewish state at a Stanford thing I was doing with someone, and I literally went to an Israeli academic in the audience, Moshe Maoz was there, for those of you who know him, and I said, Moshe, can you help me answer this question, because I don't really know what to say. He's like, I don't know what to say. He's Israeli, he's like, he lived there since he was born, 1930 or whatever. He's like, because there is no real definition. It's not something that Israel's always insisted on. And frankly, if you define Israel as a Jewish state, what are you doing about the 20% of the population?
That's not.
Or even more, that's not. What do you say? Why is it so important? So I know what he's trying to say, Netanyahu. He's trying to say that's his way of saying there will be no massive right of return, right, that will trump the Jewish majority, and by saying that. And he's trying to get Abbas to say something that Abbas can't really say, because there are Palestinian Israelis too. And so he's selling them down the river if he says it. So he's putting him in a corner. I thought maybe he could, yesterday, it's not funny, never mind, I don't like saying bad jokes. But someone said, well, maybe he can just say, okay, you're the startup nation, or like declare something else besides Jewish state that would make Bibi happy. But I just think it's a roadblock that they can't, I'm not too worried about it. I don't think it's going to be a make or break thing. And
At some point, he's going to have to stop. I mean, how long can you keep going on that line?
How long can he go?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. You're right, maybe. I don't know. He can keep going for a while, though.
Okay, the man with the San Francisco hat. Stand up if you could. Thanks.
I mean, first of all, two quick questions. There were a lot of prisoners who were released, and they were treated as heroes. This was really not covered. I mean, if the people who bombed the church in Alabama had been released and Southern governors said these are the biggest heroes, people would have boycotted and gone crazy in Berkeley. But it seemed Abbas could do that and suffer no consequences from at least the Americans. And the second thing is, in the focus on Netanyahu not doing anything, it seems there's not much said about what Abbas has been really willing to do, and there's absolutely no pressure, it appears, from the president on what he should do. Even though he did speak in English to some Israelis, he hasn't really told the Arabs in Arabic that he's willing to give up the right of return.
I think those are good points, worth discussion. So on the Abbas question, first of all, he's coming here in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. And so we'll see we'll see perhaps some of the pressure there. I'm not, and certainly one of the problems in the negotiations have been, you haven't had a Palestinian leader who's really said explicitly, look, you're not going back. We're not going back to Akka. We're going to our state and things like that. So I think it's a little bit like, no one wants to blink here, right? Bibi's got to say certain things about settlements, and Abbas has to say certain things about the right of return, and they're holding on to these cards as long as they can. And I think that if Abbas believed that, and I'm not sure he's a strong enough leader to do the deal. I agree with you. I think that that's one of the key problems, that he doesn't necessarily have the juice to necessarily do it. You're right, especially with the Palestinians divided between Fatah and Hamas. But I think if he felt that this was really going to be the moment, that there was going to be a deal, that you would see more forthcoming statements on him and pressure on him to do more. But I think given that we're just negotiating a framework, I'm not sure what he could say. I think that it would be great if, I remember being at the U.S. ambassador's 4th of July party in Herzliya a couple years ago, and Bibi was there, and he said, I will meet Abbas anywhere, anytime. And I just wanted him to come out from behind the potted plant and just like have this spontaneous something positive, some kind of
Interaction.
yeah, just talking, and it's just not happening. So I don't expect to see him do it. I think it was sad that, did I just screw this up a little bit with this? It's a little bit weird, right? The Salam Fayyad was a very good prime minister in the West Bank, and he did a lot to improve the Palestinian security forces, for example, and he was a World Bank diplomat, and he's gone now, and I worry that they don't have him anymore because he was doing a lot of things behind the scenes with the Israelis that were good. You see a lot more Israeli-Palestinian cooperation behind the scenes, by the way. One of the reasons it's been such a quiet period is because that's actually working.
Economically. Right?
No, I mean security-wise, actually.
Ah.
So in terms of thwarting attacks and going after people, it's a really good cooperation. In terms of the release of prisoners who have been in prison, a lot of, I don't know what Abbas could do to, I guess he could have banned celebrations, I guess. I don't, people, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for it. I don't know what the repercussions could have been or how he could have stopped it.
Ron, and then I'll go over there.
Thank you for coming. I'm a political scientist, but I'm going to try to ask a journalism question. We'll see how it goes. And it connects to sort of your biography and your background working for various news outlets. So your two predecessors here in this room both represented the same Israeli newspaper. It's Haaretz, which is sort of the Israeli equivalent of Fox News, except it's sort of
No, not Fox.
further.
No, MSNBC.
No, I understand, but on the other side, except Fox News is closer to the American center than Haaretz is to the Israeli center on the other side. So I think Haaretz is now read by about 5.5% of Israelis.
Is it that low?
Yeah, it's
pretty low.
it's
Definitely under.
not only is it reviled by Israelis, it distorts Israeli news, unrepresentatives of what's happening on the ground, what Israelis feel, and yet it has tremendous impact in the United States, far beyond the impact of honest, middle-of-the-road newspapers, the kinds of which you worked with. Haaretz is a anywhere between a strongly political and a propaganda pamphlet. So I'm wondering what you think the newspapers you worked for, Jerusalem Post, Jerusalem Report, you mentioned several others. Why it is that they're not having that kind of influence? And because the result is a distorted view of what's happening on the ground.
Influence where? In the world or in Israel domestically?
Particularly in the United States. So I'm
The
interested
United
in,
States.
my question is about Anglo journalism in Israel.
Okay. So first of all, yes, you're right about Haaretz being a limited readership, and it's a higher brow type thing, and it's left-wing orientation of its reporting. The biggest newspaper for a long time was Yediot Achronot, until like 5 minutes ago. But what I was told on Wednesday is that Israel Hayom, which is
Adelson.
funded by Sheldon Adelson, is really killing them right now.
It's free, too.
And in terms of, but also not only because it's right, but it's also like Bibi's only talking to them, and it's just so domestically there's certainly we could have a whole thing about what Israelis and Palestinians read in their press and how that is affecting all these mega topics. It's a great PhD thesis for someone at Berkeley or Stanford or something. But maybe a story as well. I always wanted to write that story about the lack of coverage of each other. But in terms of the American press, I worked for the Washington Post, okay? Arguably one of the more, at least 5 minutes ago, like I always say, more important newspapers in America, covering maybe one of the most covered foreign stories in the world. But the only newspaper that matters is the New York Times, frankly, on a lot of things, right? Until the New York Times does it, it's, right? It's not, I mean, how many times do you pick up a New York Times or read it online and then you hear the same story on NPR? Or it's what happens, you know, it's sort of like, and even if NPR had already done that story, by the way,
Right.
there's something about it being in the New York Times that, you know, adds a certain gravitas to it. And even, you know, my colleague Ethan Bronner, who was outstanding as a Jerusalem bureau chief, and he got into a lot of, you know, there was a lot of personal stuff with him, and he was attacked by a lot of people out here too, actually, because his son was in the Israeli army. Anyway, he was a fantastic journalist. What he or I did in terms of reporting was never as important as what Tom Friedman wrote on the editorial page. So when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian issues, Bibi's going to read what Tom Friedman's writing or what the editorial says. And that's what the President of the United States is going to see too. And that's why you've had things like, for example, the Arab Peace Plan of 2002 came out in a Tom Friedman column. He literally, the King of Saudi Arabia, he writes, go back and look at the piece, opened his drawer and handed me a piece of paper. You know, I mean, he became, it was Tom Friedman is diplomat, right? So enormous power of like a Nick Kristof or a Tom Friedman to shape the way people see these things. Not even the reporters on the ground. We don't, you know, we don't have the juice. I mean, you can sometimes with a pivotal story somewhere else. I mean, look. I mean, this takes us out of Israel for a second. But McClatchy had one of the best reporters in Washington named Warren Strobel writing about the weapons of mass destruction not being weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Right? It's well known. Consistently wrote about it
from the beginning till the end.
Right up till March 17th, 2003, and nobody. It couldn't influence the conversation. So the irony is, even in this massive, crazy, what I call era of noise, where we all we don't know what to read, blogs, BuzzFeed, internet, news, TV, we have so much that it's hard for anybody to have any influence. For people, we're not all reading the same thing. And we can't break out. It's hard to know what's important anymore. And so the Times somehow goes above the noise. And there's some good journalism happening in these other places, but it's not, you're right, it's not having the impact. So, I don't know, I think it's a little bit of a crisis.
It is a little bit. I'm thinking of a story that came out just a couple of weeks ago in which the Israeli press reported, I can't remember the issue, but the Israeli press reported something that Friedman had broke, a story Friedman had broke. So other reporters went to Friedman and asked him about that, why did he broke it? He said, well, I read it in Haaretz. I was just rewriting a story I read in Haaretz. So, but people didn't recognize it as a story until it appeared in his column, and then they said, Friedman broke this column. Okay, there are a couple people over here.
Two quick questions. Do you have any idea what might happen in Syria? And the second is the Israeli gas and oil a real story?
Oh, I love that question. I'll take the gas question first, just because it's something I did a big story about, and it's going to be in my book if I get the deal. The Israeli gas story is huge. It's huge. For those of you who don't know, Israel, in the last several years, in partnership with a small Texas energy firm called Noble Energy, discovered vast reserves of natural gas beneath the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. Enough to not only make them energy sufficient for a long time to come, energy independent, I mean, what's the word? Energy, not sufficient, right? Self-sufficient, right. But also an exporter. And there's so many interesting angles on this. One, I mean, there was a time where like Lebanon was saying, no, that's ours, and they were threatening to use Hezbollah to claim it, and there's all kinds of political issues around it, but it's actually a net good, it's a positive story. Here's where it got complicated though. The Israeli laws on this were very outdated because, well, they don't have any energy, we got dirt, we got sand here, you know? And they didn't update them before Noble, they were very skeptical. Lo yimtzu klum, shum davar sham, there's nothing there, we're not gonna find anything. And they didn't change the laws. So they negotiated a very small tax rate. This brings me back to my original thesis, though, so just bear with me for a second. So when Noble Energy struck gold, literally, the Israelis were like renegotiating the terms of the deal. Basically, they were originally going to give Noble Energy like 50% of find, the profits or whatever it is, and then they passed a law scaling it back ipso facto to 25%. So now the partner who did this is like, what? You're changing the rules on us? And so again, it's an example of Israel sort of, upsetting its friends, right? The one company that agreed to drill in Israel because they weren't afraid of the Arab boycott. ExxonMobil passed, Total passed. They all passed because they were afraid of the Saudis, okay? So your one little Charles Davidson, the CEO of Noble, says, I'll do it. And then they say, we're cutting your profits in half. So anyway, I think the energy story is going to be huge in the next couple of years, and it's something definitely to watch. Certainly also, it's a story that can be a positive story for the region in terms of energy cooperation. Same thing with water and all these issues that don't get enough play. The other question about Syria is, why are we not talking about Syria? I mean, today this was about Israel and stuff, but Jesus, we have to talk about Syria. The only time the country was, America, was talking about Syria was during that horrific gassing of those people.
Kids, yeah, right.
And if it wasn't caught on video and put on YouTube, we may not have even had that whole summertime thing, okay? So to me, our policy on Syria has been too one-dimensional, focused on poison gas and things, and we don't know what to do. We are lost on Syria. Somehow we were able to bang through revolutions in Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Tunisia, Bahrain, all those countries we dealt with in 6 months, and Syria, we don't know what to do.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that came up because you wrote a column about Syria in 2011, or an article in the Washington Post in which you said, and now I see a lot of people saying the same thing, that maybe Assad is better than what might come after him. So that Assad has made some concessions. And this is kind of the deal that maybe the deal that America, this is not what you said.
No, I didn't write a column arguing that. I wrote that, that's right, I did write about this.
That it might be the Muslim
Israelis,
right.
I wrote about it from what the Israelis wanted. This was in March 2011, that
Right.
the Israelis prefer the devil they know than the devil they don't know.
And that's an argument that's been made today about the United States too.
Certainly there's a fight going on right now internally, both at the Pentagon and in the Israeli Defense Ministry on what would emerge after, because they're not so happy with what's emerged in some of these other places as alternatives. On the other hand, there's a huge opportunity for Israel here, for Assad to go. If Netanyahu is so focused on Iran as the biggest threat, okay, and by extension, Assad is his proxy, who's funneling all those weapons to Hezbollah. So if he goes, you break that off, and so there are people making that case. But at the moment, what's a little terrifying for Israel is they have no power to shape the events that are encircling them. They can't do anything. They're treating people now on the border, Syrians, and I think there may be some, hopefully, long-term positive impact from that. But for a long time, they weren't promoting it. They weren't telling the press. The press were self-censoring that story. Mm-hmm. Then they let Isabel Kirshner write it in the Times, and everybody's doing it. But they can't really do anything but on the margins. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen? It's going to drag on. It's going to drag on for a while. That's what's going to happen.
So going back to journalism and your experience of your career, one thing that's really changed in the last 20 years is the internet.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot about sort of the death of print news media and so on here and in other countries and so on. I was just wondering, what is the internet? I mean, you mentioned people still read physical newspapers in Israel.
Yeah.
How has the internet changed the industry and the experience there and the news cycle, and just what's the impact in your perspective?
I think the internet in Israel, I mean, perhaps compared to the US, has been more limited. As I said, because there's still this like Friday ritual of going to the grocer and getting your big stack of newspapers. I think that's still happening in Israel in a way that's not happening here. Mm-hmm. And certainly the internet, though, has given, in a little bit disagreement to what you're saying, Haaretz, for sure, I mean, that's what gives it its heightened profile, even if 5% of Israelis read the hard copy, or most think it's like a left-wing rag and doesn't serve Israel's interests or whatever. Haaretz is something, and the Jerusalem Post, too, when we went online, was just happening when I was there in the early 2000s. That made it so like the State Department and the White House had to pay attention to these news outlets. If they were just being read by a few thousand people in Israel, who cares? But the internet has given those news outlets some more juice, especially Haaretz and the Jerusalem Post, which have good English language. Jerusalem Post obviously only English, and Haaretz has a very good English website. But in terms of, compared to here, I mean, obviously it's total disarray here. That's a whole nother conversation. But I know for me, for example, when I was working for the Washington Post, it took me a while to figure out what they really wanted from me as a one-person operation, and it turns out they wanted everything. They wanted, if a story was breaking, a file for the web. And my training as a newswire reporter really helped me in that respect when I worked for Reuters. Especially because I knew how to put out 2 or 3 paragraphs in 2 minutes about a bombing or whatever. And then write then do the reporting, do an update, then write the story for the web, then a new version for the next day that really throws it forward. And by the way, upload your video and your photos when you get a second. So it's kind of like everybody's a one-person everything now.
Everything. Audio too.
Audio
Not
too,
only
for
video,
sure.
Audio, yeah,
Mhm.
radio.
And photos, yeah.
Yeah.
Many of us don't believe that Iran is going to make the requisite concessions necessary to please the Americans and Europeans, certainly not please the Israelis. What do you see Netanyahu doing if the peace talks don't come to fruition?
Okay, I want you guys to go and do a Google search, and it happens about every 6 months where there's this like flurry uptick, or we should do a graph of like stories about Israel's going to strike Iran. So I've been betting against this for a very long time. Including Jeff Goldberg had a cover story in The Atlantic like 3 years ago saying they were about to bomb Iran. So the Israelis kind of leak out that we're getting ready, or they'll do something to make it seem. But this by no means means that they want to strike. It's the last thing they want. That's what I think is lost in translation here. Just because Netanyahu is bellicose on the Iranian issue doesn't mean he wants to strike. He knows they can't take out the whole program. He knows it. They can only disable parts of it maybe, and the repercussions, are huge, and he knows it. And so that's why he wants to be able to, he would actually like to see the diplomacy succeed. He just wants a more comprehensive deal. Now, what I think the United States could have done better with him and say, look, this is just a first step. It's just a little tiny 6-month interim deal. We're going to get there on the uranium. Just give us some time. Let's just test this. But he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. He thinks, and maybe he's right. Look, he has an argument to make. I mean, look what happened with his argument about North Korea is right. We believed the North Koreans. We trusted. We had 6-party talks. I covered them. Condi, all this. And then, by the way, we have a nuclear weapon. That's what he's afraid of. So I'm not saying it's not justified, okay? But in terms of, let's assume the talks do fail. I don't know if that means the next day they're going to strike. I mean, I don't know. I think that they've had much more success in secret assassinations of, I hate to call it success when you're assassinating people, but they're taking out Iranian nuclear scientists, and they're with the, what's it called, the worm. The Stuxnet, What's that? Slowing down, yeah. So the Israelis, where their genius in tech helps them, is they're finding other ways to slow the program, especially because Dafka, they don't want to strike militarily. They can do it, but it's hard. On the issue of BDS, this is an issue that I'm obviously being out here starting to become more acquainted with, and I don't really have a handle on it yet. I don't have a handle on the nuances in the movement in terms of, is this really aimed at getting Israel to end the West Bank occupation, or is it really against Israel's existence? And I think that the movement itself is a little confused on this because, I don't know, maybe someone here from BDS who could explain it more. And I also, I asked Avishai Margalit, who's a really thinker, is at Stanford right now, about it the other day. We're talking, and he sounded like he was supporting BDS in a way as an Israeli. And I said, do you support BDS? He said, absolutely not. He said, it's just going to put the Israelis more into that hunker down corner. In other words, it might undermine the goal that the BDS movement has, in a way, because Israelis will, again, as I said in the beginning, ha'olam kulo negdenu, the whole world is against us. You see? Look what's happening at UC Berkeley and Riverside and every these places. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's certainly making progress and gaining a following. It still seems limited. Look, Jerry Brown didn't care. Yeah. He didn't care on Wednesday. There were 7 BDS protesters outside who said, I hope he has, he knows that BDS is rooted here. He signed a deal with Israel. He doesn't, you know what I mean? So governor of California is like, it's not serious. So I think it has the potential to grow, though, and I think that's why Israel's devoting a $100 million campaign to try and figure out how to deal with this.
Wow. It's called a movement now. There was a while when now it's called a movement, so it's definitely grown. It's definitely grown. Yes?
Really appreciated your talk. I wanted to talk a little bit, try my best. I'm a law student here, but try my best to also ask a journalism media question. You know, I think that of all the newspapers, the Washington Post has probably done one of the better jobs on not making everything about the Middle East that isn't about Iran, about Israel. I mean, there's Jackson Deal, David Ignatius, you among the people who have really focused on Syria and on Egypt, where there should be a lot more focus. When I was living in Israel, I had a chance to meet with another Jerusalem bureau chief for another major American newspaper organization. And what he talked about when we brought up this idea of infatuation with Israel was this idea of responding to market forces. And I think that there's a point there. I mean, we're all here to talk about Israel. There's a ton of other things that are going on in the Middle East right now. You know, it's Occident versus Orient. It's the victims versus the victims' victims. It's, you know, it's the Jews versus the Muslims. I mean, everyone has a storyline. And everyone has a vested interest about what's going on between Israelis and Palestinians. My question is whether the media infatuation, or at least my perception of media infatuation, feeds into that in some way. And you know, if I were to put a point on it, it would be the terminology and what I would call a sort of false consciousness, the terminology of this concept of Mideast peace. Whenever people talk about Mideast peace, what are they talking about? They're talking about an Israeli-Palestinian deal.
Or a broader Israeli-Arab, you know, piece too.
Right, but I mean, with the disintegration of the Levant, there's a question. I mean, there's a huge question about where the Arab Peace Initiative would even have any relevance anymore, in my opinion. The question for me is, when an Israeli-Palestinian deal, which would create maybe two states, if that, at this point with Hamas running Gaza, why do people who, in my opinion, should know better, people like Jeffrey Goldberg, people like Aaron David Miller, people like that, continue to use this term Mideast peace when, with everything that's happening in Egypt, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, that are as important, if not more important, to American national security interests, and as important, if not more important, to actual Mideast peace? Why do you think that people continue to use that terminology?
So yeah, I mean, I think you're asking this question about outsized attention for this place of like that involves maybe 10 million people, right? If you count up everybody, and it's something I used to think. If we all just disappeared, all the press, right, for a minute, like, would that make it easier? You know, because so much of this is playing to the press. I mean, Netanyahu is, I mean, look, I focused a lot on Israel today because I was asked to focus on Israel, you know, and this was supposed to co-sponsor. Right. They could have done a whole thing on the Palestinians just also, but so I'm sorry if it was mostly about Israel. You know, Netanyahu had a funny moment for me when we were at the Computer History Museum on Wednesday in Mountain View, and we signed this agreement about water and biotech. And then he says, and I think the Israeli press wants me to say something. But meanwhile, no one, they were like drinking coffee. They were just like, they weren't even paying attention. They weren't even paying attention. And he says, you know, overnight, the Israeli Navy seized, you know, and he like goes into his statement about the seizure, okay? So in other words, he was using the press in that moment. I mean, he did have news to report, but to make this statement in America about this, okay? So that's when I think, if we weren't here, like, how would this all be different? It's an intellectual exercise that, of course, we can't accomplish. It's interesting that, you know, as a foreign correspondent, to watch, you know, after 9/11, there was this moment where, oh my God, we don't have any foreign correspondents. We don't know who was Al Qaeda? What's Bin Laden? Oh my God, we got to send people.
What's Sunni? What's Shiite?
What's a Sunni? What's a Shiite? You know, and there was a moment where maybe we'll deploy resources, and as you know, of course, Joan, like, they all pulled back. So when the Arab Spring happened, it was like, I mean, the Post had just sent a new bureau chief to Cairo. She had just started a week earlier, you know? And so it was like, we were all caught, you know, flat-footed. So it was, there's just not enough resources. And yet, there's still like all these people, because you said because of market forces, and someone should tell the publishers in New York that are considering my book proposal, that there's this endless appetite for this stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're saying, do we need another book on it? Anyway, so there is outsized attention, and it does skew the perception of the relevance and importance geopolitically of the conflict. I think you're right, but it's also, like you said so deftly, like it's like, oh, these two guys are fighting. I get it. And bad guy or good guy, depending on your political perspective. Whereas Egypt, You got to understand Sisi now and the Brotherhood and the April 6th movement. Never mind, I mean, Syria, we don't even know what's going on the ground because it's too dangerous to report there. I mean, I do a whole class at Stanford about this, about whether we need foreign correspondents to cover when you've got everybody with their YouTube and everything. I argue you do, of course. So it's murky foreign news. People just, I don't know how interested they are. And it's a problem.
I would also say, though, that it's not only the reporters who are reporting. The reporters have editors. And the editors have bosses, too. And
they make choices.
Yeah, and they're making choices, too, and they're demanding. So I think it goes all the way up the chain. And I do agree with you that if you have editors who are more informed, nuanced, whatever, have the background, have the context, that would change the way people cover it. And I just don't think they do enough of that. So I agree with you. Okay, we're getting close to the end. One more. Is there a woman who would like to ask a question?
Oh, really?
What I missed in this talk was reference to religion and religious tensions that
Religious
happen.
tension.
Yeah.
In Israel or across?
So it's both in Israel, within the Israeli Jewish society, and outside Israel, in the Arab Muslim world, which I think is very influential about what's happening now, both in Israel and in the region, which also influences Israel.
Yeah, so it's a very good point. I definitely was much more focused on the politics today than the internal schisms religiously within the populations. But certainly, as part of that post-Palestinian narrative that's going on in Israel, besides the inflation in the price of cottage cheese and Tel Aviv apartments, obviously this tension, you know, when Israel feels like it doesn't have to deal with the Palestinian issue, it turns internal. It goes like this. And so right now, the issue of ultra-Orthodox Jews, whether to be drafted or not, for the last 2 years has been a major issue. And it ties to the economics, though, because Israelis, you know, for those of you who know or don't know, you know, Israelis who are secular, pretty much to simplify it, men serve 3 years in the army, 2 years women. And ultra-Orthodox Jews do not have to serve at all. And that's been changing now. There's been a demand, and the court has ruled they have to do some service, and the Israeli Defense Ministry is supposed to implement this, but it's so hard to do politically for Netanyahu that they keep kicking the can down the road, and people are getting resentful that the Kingdom of Tel Aviv and one portion of the country is paying basically so these other people, the ultra-Orthodox, can study and go to yeshiva and don't have to go to the army. So that tension is definitely playing out. For me, as a political observer, what's interesting about it is that is how the religious parties. I'm less interested in this whole debate over the draft than I am about the national religious parties, the settlers who are really holding on to Judea and Samaria at all costs, and who are very prominent in Netanyahu's coalition. And Netanyahu's choice to continue to have people like Naftali Bennett or whoever in the coalition, and what that means for Israel's ability to define itself, right? Obviously, I mean, fundamental Islam is the great challenge of our day. Okay, let's just say it. It is, and we didn't do a broader Middle East thing today, but it is the fundamental, you know, what are we going to do with radical Islam? What are we going to do? We haven't figured it out since 9/11. And look what's happening in Egypt right now. I mean, Sisi's beating it back. They had a moment there. He's beating it back. I mean, Syria, we don't know what to do. I mean, Egypt's going to have Egypt. It's like a major economy, okay? And now you've got suicide bombings and stuff which don't get enough coverage. Hillary Clinton went when she was Secretary of State and offered them $1 billion in aid to Egypt. You know, I mean, it was like, this is not South Sudan. You know what I mean? We should have a more sophisticated relationship with them. So I don't know. I mean, and I don't know who's doing the deep thinking on this right now, but it's, and I think it's got to, you see more in the Arab world. You're right. It's got to be kind of, they got to figure it out. But yeah, it's kept Abbas and Ismail Haniyeh from really working it out for the last 7 years. So maybe we'll go another 7 after that. But it's definitely a major problem, yeah.
Well, at least a series of problems. I think that's...
We didn't solve it all today, I'm sorry.
Well, wait for your book, though, or you'll have to come back again. Thanks very much, Janine.
Come down to Stanford.